lying about their age to join the service, because after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, everybody and their brother wanted to go and fight. 75 years later, we now look back on that and we have a memorial so that we can come and sit, listen to the water, look at the columns, and remember the sacrifices. And on this Memorial Day, while this is a mall that's filled with memorials and monuments to people who have passed, who have given their all, I can think of no better place to spend it than here at the World War II Memorial. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you to our veterans of the World War II effort here as well. I want to acknowledge today a very special group of middle school students who have traveled all the way from Normandy, France with their teacher, Ms. Christielle Zucolato. Please welcome Collage Eli from Fayure, Normandy. Where are you? It's an interesting thing. This memorial is not but 13, 15 years, but it took almost as long for a congresswoman to introduce the idea to have this memorial built for as long as it's been here. Think about that. You would think to yourself, after World War II, with the millions that signed on and jumped on ships or got on planes to travel to places they'd never heard of, never thought they would go, and to go up against Hitler or to go up against in Japan, you would think to yourself, why wouldn't there be a World War II memorial? And these columns behind me represent 400,000 plus souls that never made it back. And those are the folks we remember today. But it was an effort to get this memorial built. Would you agree that this is a beautiful memorial behind me? With us today is going to be a congresswoman you're going to hear from, our keynote speaker today. She's basically been tapped as the mother of this memorial because not only did she introduce the idea, but she was the one who tenaciously fought about getting it built, and we'll talk about her in just a second. But first, I'm pleased to introduce the official party for today's memorial. As I say their names, if you'd walk across and grab a seat. Hold on one sec. Did you guys do that? Did you kick that chair sideways? You can't keep them under control, out of control. Keynote speaker for today is Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur. Representing the National Park Service is the acting superintendent of the National Mall and Memorial Parks, Mr. Jeffrey Reinbold. The chairman of the board for Friends of the National World War II Memorial, Mr. Josiah Bunting III. From the Military District of Washington, our chaplain for today's event is Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Todd Wolf, and a good friend. Representing the Maritime Administration is the director, Kevin Tokarski. We did that without music playing. You should have seen, we'd take a chair away from them. We thank you all for being here. You can have a seat for right now if you would. All right, we're good to go, ladies and gentlemen. So now I just told you to sit down. Now I'm going to ask everybody at this time to please rise for the presentation of colors and the playing of the national anthem by the United States Army's Band, Brass Quintet, and the invocation by Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Todd Wolf.
Let us pray. Lord, you are welcome here today. As we recognize those who died while serving in the uniformed services, please bless their memory and their surviving relatives. Additionally, during this ceremony, may those who died as a result of service-related health issues be honored and their relatives be blessed as a result as well. As many service and combat injuries linger long after service commitments are completed, yet still eventually result in departure from life on earth, may we remember these fallen too. We also ask for equivalent honor and blessing for contracted U.S. citizens who died while in civilian combatant or otherwise supporting roles working for U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Air Force, and Merchant Marines. Please etch into all of our memories the depth of these sacrifices, and may we conduct ourselves in manners which recognizably reflect our consideration of the cost of the independencies which we so commonly experience in this great nation. May your hand not be lifted from our sphere of trusted influence due to indignation from us potentially caving into flippancy, ingratitude, and arrogance regarding the great compensations rewarded by so many who have sacrificially gone before us due to their untimely fallings in service to our nation. We pray this in the name above all names. Amen.
Please be seated. At this time, I'd like to welcome back Miss Deanna Martin to perform a special rendition of God Bless America.
While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. Sing with me, won't you? God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. One more time. Here we go. Sing out for me. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you again. Did you need this? There you go. We couldn't have picked a better day for this, really. In years past, it's been 95 degrees, or maybe it's overcast and cold. Today's perfect. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to introduce the Acting Superintendent of the National Mall and Memorial Parks, Mr. Jeffrey Reinbold.
On behalf of the National Park Service, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the World War II Memorial. The memorial that commemorates a generation of Americans who emerged from the Depression to fight and win the most devastating war in world history. On this Memorial Day, we gather to remember those who, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, gave the last full measure of devotion to their country. Here at the World War II Memorial, the more than 400,000 men and women who never made it home are represented by the field of gold stars on the Freedom Wall behind me. Each star, each one of the 4,048 stars symbolizes 100 individual Americans who paid the price of freedom. I extend a very special welcome to our distinguished guests, the World War II veterans, their families and friends, and to all of you who've traveled from near and far to be here today. For this Memorial Day ceremony, we are honored to be joined by Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, who authored the bill that created this magnificent memorial and continues to be its champion. We are grateful for your ongoing support of the World War II Memorial and the veterans who represent it. I would also like to express my appreciation to the United States Army Brass Quintet for the music provided this morning, to Chaplain Wolf, and to Administrator Kevin Tokarski of the U.S. Maritime Administration. Thank you for being here today and your support of the veterans that this memorial honors. I would also like to recognize the friends of the National World War II Memorial, Mr. Josiah Bunting and his team, who are our partners in the care of this memorial and co-sponsor of this morning's ceremony. We thank you for your partnership. We share in your mission to ensure that the legacy and sacrifices of the World War II veterans are not forgotten. And to the National Park Service staff who interpret and maintain this magnificent memorial, as well as our amazing volunteers who help educate the more than 4 million people who come here each year. Thank you very much. All of the monuments and memorials along the National Mall promote the spirit of unity and remembrance, giving all of us a way to recognize those who have served and those who continue to serve our great nation. They remind all Americans of our common heritage and our way of ensuring that fallen heroes and their deeds are not forgotten. We are here today to specifically remember and honor all the World War II veterans, their families, and the families of those who didn't return. We honor them for their dedicated and valuable service. In closing, let us not forget the words of President Harry Truman, inscribed on this very memorial. Our debt to the heroic men and valiant women in the service of our country can never be repaid. They have earned our undying gratitude. America will never forget their sacrifices. Thank you.
So I was kind of a history geek growing up, and I figured it's a good time to share some of that knowledge now because I think it's relevant. 1937, George Marshall was sworn in as the Army General of the Armies. Same day that he was sworn in was the same day that Adolf Hitler was invading Poland. And George Marshall said that he thinks there's a threat looming. And at that time, the United States only had a few 100,000 men in the military. And George Marshall said, with that threat looming, we need to do something about our military, and fast. By the end of World War II, our military was in the millions. And the effort that went into putting that military out on the battlefield, not only to victory, because had we lost World War II, make no mistake, we wouldn't be sitting here enjoying a day like this. We'd be speaking German or Japanese, and this would be gone. The United States would have lost everything. It was an all-or-nothing venture that went into World War II. George Marshall understood that, built up the military, and sent off millions to fight. Behind me is a representative of 400+ thousand that did not make it home. And these are young men and women that went off to fight. At that time, it was mostly men, but the women played a big role in a lot of roles that really didn't get a lot of credit then, but now is starting to get credit now. And you'll notice the columns don't just stand for the military that didn't make it home, but there are names inscribed here, Rosie the Riveter and others, civilians that played an active role in making sure that this country not only stayed in the fight, but won that fight. And at the end of World War II, when you add up all the dead from all the nations that took part, the total losses, and I tell this to friends who aren't really up on history, and they always just get that bewildered, faraway look when I say the number. I always ask them, I said, how many people do you think were killed during World War II for all the countries that were involved? And they'll throw out a few million, 10 million. At the end of the day, between 74 and 78 million people were killed during World War II. And the reason I give that history preface is because you think to yourself, when you come here to this mall filled with memorials and monuments, why wasn't there a World War II memorial? And that was a question that our keynote speaker got asked at, of all things, a fish fry. I swear to you, the congresswoman was at a fish fry, and a gruff World War II vet yelled at her, "Hey, congresswoman, why isn't there a World War II memorial?" And that's a great question, because at that time there wasn't. And she pointed out, well, there's Iwo Jima, which if there's any Marines in the group, and we got Marines out here, how do you designate when you know there's a Marine in the crowd? There you go. Which is different from the Army. My friends over here, Pershing Zone, how do you say it in the Army? See, it's hooah and hoorah. Those kids could never get together to figure that out. They're off by like one syllable. But she thought Iwo Jima was the memorial. But that was for the Marines for one battle during World War II. So she said, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's build a World War II memorial to memorialize all those who went off to battle and never came home to their families. It wasn't just one time that she introduced this legislation. It was a number of times. When we say act of Congress, this was more of an act of God, because it was introduced 3 different times, 5 years from the minute she said, I'd like to introduce a World War II memorial, until it got approved. And then it was still another, 10 years before it actually was put together, as you see here. And it wasn't just her when the building started. Steven Spielberg was active. Steven Spielberg's Tom Hanks, remember he had Saving Private Ryan, the movie came out, which got renewed interest in the whole idea of World War II. Walmart was involved, FedEx was involved. There were dozens of people, big sponsors, that put up a lot of money to help build this memorial behind me. And friends, by the way, friends of the World War II Memorial now, they're currently in the midst of a 4-year World War II 75th anniversary commemoration. It began on the 75th anniversary of the attack of Pearl Harbor. It's going to continue through the 75th anniversary of VJ Day, which is in 2020. So we're going to have a lot of these ceremonies out here on the memorial. And Friends of the Memorial is the only organization marking nearly every battle in which American troops participated during World War II here at the World War II Memorial. The Friends of the National World War II Memorial is also working to create the next greatest generation of Americans through community service and their programs. And before I introduce our keynote speaker, we have a representative from Friends of the World War II Memorial. I want to bring him up. It's Mr. Josiah Bunting III. He's the chairman of the board of the Friends of the National World War II Memorial, an author, an educator, and a veteran. Please welcome Mr. Josiah Bunting.
Congresswoman, God bless you and thank you. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self our country loved, and mercy more than life. A beautiful line Most Americans don't know most of the lines of our great national hymns, but that's my favorite. Who more than self our country loved, and mercy more than life. It is important to remember that while the 75th anniversary of the greatest generation who fought in our behalf in Europe and the Pacific is now with us, we are honoring today Americans who paid the supreme sacrifice in all of our wars, formerly called Decoration Day, but we think, and I think most of you must note, that we are conducting these ceremonies almost at the midpoint between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. The founder and establisher of our country and its greatest savior. And I particularly am appreciative of occasions like this because there is no one here, no American here, who does not feel ineffable pride and gratitude in our country and in the unity which characterized the greatest generation in its 75th anniversary and when they went overseas, and everything that they embraced refreshes in our memory, in our own convictions, to emulate them. God bless America. We are honored, all of us, to be on this hallowed ground. Thank you.
We have a special privilege today of having the United States Army Brass Quintet. These folks over here, these good, well-dressed men over here, 5 of them. It sounds like there's like 30 of you guys, by the way, when you play. And if you're not familiar with Pershing's Own, which they're the smaller group of Pershing's Own, this is 200, what are you guys, 260, about 260 musical ambassadors that travel the world. Wherever there's a flag raising on a new consulate, representatives of Pershing Own go. And if you've never heard them play before, they're amazing. So that's why we brought these guys out. They're going to go ahead and play for you right now. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, this is where we're going to do exercise. When you clap your hands, it gets circulation going through your body. Did you know that? Okay. We're going to clap really loud. I'm going to introduce to you some of the heroes of today, some World War II veterans who have joined us today. I'm going to give you their name, read to you where they were attached and what they did, and then that's your cue to go bananas. Are you good with this? I didn't hear you. You guys good with that? Well, all right. I just want to make sure this thing was on. All right, here we go. Where's Holly? Holly. Well, let's try this. Is Mr. Harold Radish here? All I need you to do is either wave or stand up. Is Harold, did he make it with us today? There you go. Harold was drafted in 1943, sent to France with the 90th Infantry Division, fought in the Ardennes, was at the Battle of the Bulge. In February 45, near the Siegfried Line, he was taken prisoner of war by Germans. Harold, being Jewish, got rid of his dog tags before being captured. He was freed by the English soldiers in 1945, Mr. Harold Radish. All right, that's a pretty good warm-up, but I do think you can get louder. Here we go. Mr. Carmel Wetzel, he was drafted to the Army's 104th Infantry, 3rd Battalion, 26th Yankee Division. He drove on the Red Ball Express on a mission to Robilat, France, near Metz, Germany, was captured by the German Army, spent a little more than 6 months in Stalag 12 and Stalag 2 in a work group on a German Air Force base in Germany. He was liberated by the Russians at the end of the war. Mr. Carmel Wetzel. Timberwolves, yep. Mr. Lou Perrone. That's all right. You can just wave if you want to. You can wave. That a boy. Lou Perrone served as a ball turret gunner on a B-17 Flying Fortress from 43 to 45. He flew 32 missions with the 533rd Bomb Squadron. He's the only living member of his 10-man crew who flew missions over Germany during World War II as a part of the 8th Air Force. He currently lives in Edgewater, Maryland. Mr. Lou Perrone. Colonel Jimmy Rife, serving with the U.S. Army 27th Infantry Division during World War II, leading a platoon in the invasion of Okinawa in 45. Spent 30 years with the Army, including service as Chief of Staff of the 82nd Airborne Division. That's a pretty tough bunch. He currently lives in Gainesville, Virginia. Colonel Jimmy Rife. Please, get loud. We love that. Here we go. Mr. Herman Zaitchik. He stormed Utah Beach at H Hour on D-Day with the Army's 4th Infantry Division. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He helped liberate Paris, and he helped liberate Dachau, one of the camps. Mr. Herman Zaitchik. Mr. Andrew Abugalis, enlisted in the Navy in 42, was assigned to the crew of the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown, serving in the Pacific, taking part in 43 attacks on Marcus, Wake, and Gilbert Islands, and supported the invasion force at Gilbert Island in 44, the attacks on Marshall Islands, and supported the invasion force at Marshall Island. He says his many memorable days consisted of serving on the greatest ship in the U.S. Navy with the finest officers and sailor. Mr. Andrew Abugalis. Lieutenant Colonel William Benelli joined the Army Air Corps in 1940. By the way, the Army Air Corps predates the Air Force, just so you know. 1940. You look good, sir. I know, right? He was shipped off to Hawaii, where he trained as an aircraft mechanic. He survived the attacks on Pearl Harbor in 41, returned to the U.S. to train as a B-17 pilot. In 44, he was sent to Foggia, Italy, and he piloted 30 sorties, missions, over Axis territories. He earned many decorations, was promoted to the rank of captain. Lieutenant Colonel William Benelli. Mr. Joseph Ryan, where are you, sir? He served with the United States Army Signal Corps, 9th Infantry in the European Theater. Mr. Joseph Ryan. Peter Naylor? Did Peter Naylor make it with us today? Sir, good to see you. Wait a second. Hold the phone. Thought you were Harold, my bad. Peter Naylor enlisted in the Army Air Force as an aviation cadet in December of 43 and trained to be a B-29 flight engineer. He was scheduled for deployment to the Pacific Theater when the war ended. Mr. Naylor used the GI Bill to earn an engineering degree, was employed to the Department of the Navy, and had assignments in Vietnam and South Korea. Mr. Peter Naylor. Mr. Kenneth Oakes. There you are, sir. Enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1944. He was 17 years old. Lied about your age, didn't you? Attaboy. He was assigned to the USS Ticonderoga as a 20-millimeter gunner, as coxsman 3rd class, and after the war he joined the Navy Reserves and then the Army Reserves. Couldn't make up your mind, huh? Army, Navy, right? Good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here. Mr. Callan Francis Safel, enlisted in the United States Navy in 1942 at the age of 17. Another guy who fudged his age. I see how it works. He attained the rank of electrician's mate 1st class, stationed in the Pacific, where he was responsible for degaussing wooden-hulled minesweepers in hopes of preventing magnetic mines from detonating. Mr. Callan Francis Safel. Mr. Harry Miller. He's a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II, taking part in the Battle of Bulge. He also served in the Army in Korea and with the Air Force during Vietnam. Mr. Harry Miller. And Mr. George Arnstein. Served in the United States Army in the European theater. Mr. George Arnstein. How about one more really loud, crazy round of applause for these veterans? It is so great having them here with us. All right, back to that story about that fish fry. Let's start with Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur. She's a United States representative for the Ohio's 9th Congressional District, currently serving her 19th term in the House. Congresswoman Kaptur is the longest-serving woman in the House. She's also currently the longest-serving woman in Congress and the second longest-serving woman ever. So she's got that going for her. So the meeting at the fish fry took place, and then in 1987, she first introduced legislation to try and get a World War II memorial built. And that didn't go anywhere. She introduced it again in 88, or 89, I should say. That didn't go anywhere. She introduced it again in 91. She introduced legislation for the 4th time in 1993. 4th time's always the charm, isn't it? This time the legislation passed. President Bill Clinton signed the legislation into law, and finally the National World War II Memorial was dedicated. Well, it was signed into law back in 93, but then 2004, you do the math, it was Hey, we have a duck. Look at this. In 2004, it was finally dedicated. It's 15 years after the fact this memorial finally went up. And I don't know about you, but being where it is right here in the mall, I think it's probably one of the nicest and finest memorials I've ever seen. And I've seen a few around the world. This is beautiful. 5 years ago, during a special celebration marking the 10th anniversary of the memorial's dedication, the Friends of the National World War II Memorial, the founder, Ambassador Hayden Williams, who also led the site selection and design efforts for the memorial, wrote of Congresswoman Kaptur, quote, "She has often been called, figuratively speaking, the mother of the World War II Memorial. She deserves the accolade. It was Marcy Kaptur who played the critical role in moving the World War II memorial legislation through Congress with great skill and persistence. Congresswoman Kaptur has remained the memorial's strongest champion on the Hill during the location and design approval battles." That's half the battle, too. 5 years to get it finally adopted, and then came, well, where are we going to put it? What's it going to look like? And that went on forever, which is ridiculous. Her strong and passionate voice was heard at one hearing after another. Her deep devotion to the veterans of World War II is legendary. In many ways, Marcy Kaptur's name is synonymous and will always be associated with the World War II Memorial. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you the mother of World War II Memorial, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur.
Greetings. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Jonathan, and to all those who have gathered here today, most notably every single World War II veteran who made the effort to be with us here. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you for giving us the America that we know. May I offer a very happy Memorial Day greeting in this year of 2019. Chairman Bunting, thank you so very much for all you have done with the Friends of the Memorial to lead us to this place today. Here we are, a free people. Today we unite to revere, to remember, and to render tribute to the millions of our fellow citizens who have made the ultimate sacrifice for an ideal, the ideal of liberty for all people, for all of us, and for our progeny. Now, liberty and freedom hold distinctly different meanings. Freedom is the condition of being free, not under the control of another. But liberty is the deeper condition of having been freed from an oppression, a dictatorial regime, or starvation, or poverty, or disease, or forced evacuation, or war. Those who have been liberated have overcome some form of human debasement or degradation. America's very being was created to liberate people, to liberate people. And so today, most of our citizenry has been born into freedom. Historically, we are the undeserving, intergenerational benefactors of heroic selflessness. Surely, history will ask us, and each succeeding generation, what have we done for liberty to measure up to the nobility of those who gave us our freedom? Since America's founding, over 1,300,000 Americans have sacrificed their lives in service to our nation. Another 1,500,000 wounded have given to us. These are overwhelming figures to contemplate. We bow low before them. This Memorial Day and every Memorial Day honors them. We gather here at this National World War II Memorial located along sacred space, our nation's mall of democracy. Here, our grateful nation assembles to pay homage to all Americans throughout our history who faced liberty's enemies and sacrificed their mortal beings, rendering their substance so we might live in a free nation. This memorial particularly honors the 20th century's generation of Americans whose overwhelming genius and valor achieved the profound victory of liberty over tyranny for our modern world. Since its dedication in 2004, over 65 million visitors have journeyed here to honor and bear witness to their vast courage. This outpouring of affection is a deserved tribute, yes? Those American men and women we honor here set forth across the world's oceans or served on our home front in total war mobilization to defend liberty and its inherent truths that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the face of profound evil, they prevailed for us and for generations to come. In the immortal words of great Army General George Marshall, before the sun sets, our flag will be recognized throughout the world as a symbol of freedom and overwhelming force. His prediction came true, as America emerged from the ruins of World War II, during which upwards of 80 million persons had been killed, the most costly war in world history. The U.S. then reluctantly but necessarily assumed the mantle as leader of the free world. Following the bloodiest of wars in human history on the Atlantic and Pacific fronts, our nation, though war-weary, embarked on the post-war rebuilding of nations leveled by conflict across Europe, Japan, and the Pacific. The idealistic goal was to create a set of robust alliances so strong and vital, liberty could prevail absent of war. Across Europe, this constellation of free nations anchored by NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as well as bolstered by the Marshall Plan and the United Nations, set in place the foundation for the post-war free world bequeathed to us. Within 4 decades, in 1989, due to this peaceful Allied commitment, the last remaining tyranny in Europe, the communist-led Soviet Union, collapsed of its own decay. The vast region it had encompassed entered an era of free fall, political upheaval, and corruption that continues today. This disarray requires the steadfast attention of those who understand the price of freedom and the precious alliances necessary to protect it. The location of this memorial bears vast significance for our nation. It lies at the very heart of our nation's capital, between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. The Washington Monument anchors the mall's eastern flank, representing our first president, George Washington, and America's 18th century revolution to establish liberty, casting off foreign domination on this continent. The Lincoln Memorial to the west represents President Abraham Lincoln and our nation's 19th century bitter civil war to determine who would be free in our fledgling democracy. Ultimately, our union was preserved, and those previously enslaved were liberated. Then, centered between these monuments in this gracious space, rests the World War II Memorial. It is a lasting tribute to the 20th century's most noteworthy achievement by America's most unselfish generation, their hard-fought victory of liberty over tyranny. This memorial bears no individual's name. Rather, it commemorates the sacred victory of a generation that preserved and united the free world. Importantly, from the ruins of that war, they ingeniously created new global institutions to carry liberty forward in a fractured world. And yes, the price of that peace has been extraordinary. 400,000 Americans whose remains are scattered across our world died for our nation during World War II. Each of the 4,048 gold stars on the Wall of Heroes here represents 100 fallen Americans who gave what Lincoln had termed their last full measure of devotion. They did this not just for their freedom, nor the freedom of their fellow countrymen, as their forefathers had. They did it to prove to the world that liberty belongs to everyone. Just across the Potomac River, more than 400,000 more of America's patriotic sons and daughters are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. They are service members from every war in which the United States has ever fought. When you walk the silent footpaths of Arlington, or hear the somber sound of taps as the wind rustles in the trees, and witness row after row of white headstones, think that equals how many Americans also paid with their lives in World War II so that the world could be free of Nazism and imperialism. The idea for the World War II Memorial, as was mentioned, was born in Ohio, the Buckeye State. It was an Ohio World War II Army Tank Command veteran named Roger Durbin who sought out his member of Congress to suggest the idea. It was another Ohioan that created the idea of honor flight, which has flown over 200,000 veterans to Washington to visit the memorials of their respective conflicts at no cost to the veteran. This memorial has become one of the most frequented on the National Mall, welcoming over 65 million visitors since its opening in 2004. It stands as a guardian to the memory of the greatest generation. Their legacy will live on. The memorial was built to ensure that future generations who might never have the opportunity to meet firsthand the members of the greatest generation may know their sacrifice. May this memorial act as a living symbol throughout the ages that there are ideals worth pursuing and protecting. In every century, including the current one, the very idea of America has been challenged. From its formation in the 18th century, born out of a revolution against colonial rule, to the preservation of our Union in the 19th century following our bloody Civil War, resulting in the defeat of human slavery, to our rise in the 20th century as leader of free nations following the defeat of tyranny. Now, in this 21st century, when I had hoped for an era of peace, 9/11 occurred. Instead, our nation has entered into the most protracted wars in U.S. history, largely in oil-rich desert regions and territories where no coherent governing structure exists. Our formerly oil-dependent existence is transforming to energy independence here at home, essential to our security. General James Mattis well framed the added growing national security challenges of a new resource-challenged era, saying, and I quote, "The effects of a changing climate, such as increased maritime access to the Arctic, rising sea levels, desertification, among others, greatly impact our security situation. As we move deeper into this 21st century, our aspirations to meet new global challenges of population growth, resource limits, and carbon emissions must be no less wise. While the greatest generation saved the world from imperialist, Nazi, and later Soviet communist tyranny, distinctive specters, destructive specters of social conflicts of the 20th century remain. In the words of American author and historian Timothy Snyder, and I quote, "The history of the Holocaust is not over. Its precedent is eternal, and its lessons have not been learned," unquote. The divisive forces of religious, racial, ethnic, and tribal intolerance must be met and leveled in enforceable rules of law. For our inhabited world, the question will be whether those who love liberty can lead the world on an intelligent course to meet the future, or whether greater wars will result for challenged resources and unaddressed human conflicts. Our nation needs the post-World War II institutions of global order more than ever. Without them, humankind will descend to chaos. In each century, at each testing, and at great human cost, liberty triumphed. So today, in grateful memory of those who gave their lives for liberty, let us rededicate and unify our nation in common cause. With like-minded allies on this Memorial Day of 2019, let each American today recommit to carry forward liberty's legacy of protecting and defending it, recalling the rousing words in the poem Ulysses, "One equal temper of heroic heart, strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." Onward, liberty. Thank you on this Memorial Day of 2019.
Real quick, we had one veteran that did not make the list but is with us today, so I need you guys again. This is audience participation. Go crazy for him. Charles Temple, United States Navy. So we're going to dedicate some wreaths in a second, but I would invite you to come talk to some of the veterans. The interesting about war is it sears into your memory the details, the facts, the days, the smells, the sights perfectly. They may not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast tomorrow. I can't even tell you what I had for today. But they can, in detail, tell you what happened back during the war. Come say hi to them. Come shake their hand. You're welcome to do that. And on this day, when most of us think it's a free day, it's a day we can go out and be with our families and barbecue, yes, it is. But at some point, raise a glass or tip your hat and thank those who made our freedoms possible by their sacrifice. Have a great day. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while we prepare for the official wreath-laying ceremony. After the playing of taps, you will have the opportunity to take photos with the veterans over with the wreaths and to meet them and to thank them.